Planted aquariums may seem difficult at first, but I promise with these 5 tips, it'll be much easier than you think, and you'll be growing plants in no time. What's up YouTube? Ryan, aka The Lucky Schmuck, back again with another video for you. And today I want to share with you guys my top 5 tips for success as a beginner with a planted aquarium. Coming in at number 5 on my top 5 tips for success in a planted aquarium, it is use good substrate. Now, that good substrate could be something like EcoComplete. It could be something like fluorite. There's tons of different products out there. I just don't recommend using plain gravel or some plain sand. If you do happen to want to use gravel or sand, which is a fine, cheap alternative, and I have other videos talking about this as well, I happen to use some gravel, rocks, or pool sand myself. Put a fine layer of dirt underneath that aquarium. So essentially, if you're gonna go with a planted aquarium the cheap way, do a dirted aquarium. Look up videos on how to do it. It's also easier than you think. Just don't overdo it with the dirt. But it doesn't really matter if you go with the fluorite or the EcoComplete. The difference between those two in particular, because I happen to use both, I like the EcoComplete because it's easier to plant into, whereas the fluorite, the plants aren't, it's not as easy to plant them in. So if you're just starting out and you have some cash, I would say EcoComplete. If you want to do it cheap, which is what I did, do a little bit of dirt and do some pool filter sand or some black diamond blasting sand. Coming in at number 4 on my countdown of top 5 tips for success in a planted aquarium as a beginner, and that is choose the correct plants. Now, if you're like me, you see all these beautiful aquariums on YouTube and forums and everywhere, and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to recreate that. So all those crazy plants with the red and the carpeting and what have you, you're gonna set yourself up for failure if you try to do that from the get-go. Now, if you want to go do it, by all means, trial and error. You may, do a lot of research, spend some money killing some plants. Go for it. You only learn by trying. If you want to have some higher success rates, in my opinion, and just kind of dip your toes in and have some fun and not kill a bunch of plants, I'd recommend going for some plants like Java Fern, okay? And it comes in a few different types, like Windeloff and Trident. So you don't have to you're not stuck to one looking plant. Another rhizome plant is a Nubius. These are plants that can grow on rocks and wood. If you're looking for something that maybe is a carpeting type plant, something like a dwarf hairgrass is pretty hardy. There's also a lot of floating plants out there that aren't that hard to grow, such as guppy grass. There's some mosses like Java moss. They grow slow, but they usually should do well for you. Same thing with a hornwort or wisteria are all good beginner plants. So set yourself up for success by choosing the correct plants. My number 3 tip on my countdown of top 5 tips for having a successful planted aquarium as a beginner, and that is have adequate and consistent lighting. Now, I know that's a very general term, adequate. What does that mean, Ryan? In my opinion, the big thing is consistency, whereas invest in a timer. You can find them for a few bucks. That way, every day your lights are coming on and off at the same time. You can pick that time and you can kind of play around with how long they're on for. My recommendation is start with 6-7 hours a day. You typically don't need much more than that, and keep it consistent. If for some reason you want to adjust the time that they're on, adjust it slowly. Don't just go from one day 6 hours to the next day 8, 9, 10 hours. Adjust it slowly. Now, in terms of like the type of lighting and what I mean by adequate, I simply just mean, don't get a little desk lamp or something that is not meant to grow plants. Invest in a cheap LED light. There's Aquaneat lights on eBay. You can also find, some fluorescent tubes. Okay, as long as the tank isn't super deep, and I'd recommend starting out on a more shallow tank, 10-gallon tank, 20-gallon longs. Those are perfect tanks to start with plants. If you're gonna try to start with, even like the 29 beside me is a little taller, or a 55-gallon, those are taller tanks, so you may have to upgrade to some more specialized lighting. If you're going to have a bigger tank to start, I would definitely invest in one of the cheaper LEDs, like I said, such as the Aquaneat light on eBay. But in my opinion, you don't have to go crazy with a brand name light that costs $200-300 in order to grow plants. You just don't. My number 2 tip for success in a planted aquarium as a beginner is the proper expectations. Now, once again, set yourself up for success. Don't expect that a week, 2 weeks, even a month or two after you get your planted aquarium that it's gonna look like ones you've seen in magazines or online, okay? It's gonna take time, but that's okay. If you don't have the patience and you're not in it for the long haul, then a planted aquarium, may not be for you. If you're thinking that you're just gonna grow the most beautiful scaped aquarium overnight, it's not gonna happen. A lot of it is kind of enjoying the ride, getting the plants, watching them grow. Some of the Anubias in the tank behind me have taken forever to grow, and I'm at amazement watching them grow now. It's awesome. They're one of the slower growing plants, but typically, as a rule of thumb, the slower they are to grow, the slower they are to kill. So, the Anubias was one of the first plants I got, and it took a while to kind of get a hold, but after a few months, it started to take off. So if you're gonna have success in a planted aquarium, you're gonna have to have patience, because you could be 2 months into it and give up, and you're right around the corner from maybe seeing, reaping the benefits of your time and efforts. My number one tip for the most success having a planted aquarium as a beginner is make it an ecosystem. Try to recreate something. It doesn't have to be a biotope, but what I'm saying is do your plants, do some fish, maybe some snails. Don't be afraid of snails. Maybe get into something like, an assassin snail or a mystery snail that won't breed as readily as some of the pest snails. But if you're gonna have a planted aquarium, you're gonna run into pest snails. It's going to happen, but that's a good thing. You want to manage them, but creating an ecosystem, like I said, if you have, you can get some cherry shrimp in there as long as your fish aren't too aggressive. But set it up as an ecosystem like it would be in the wild with a good amount of plants too. You don't have to go crazy, but starting with 1 or 2 plants at the beginning is not the way to do it. You want to get a good amount of plants in there. You want to have some fish. You want to eventually, like I said, introduce some snails, some shrimp if they're compatible, and make it an ecosystem. Things like driftwood, adding different types of plants, different types of fish, bottom feeders, middle swimmers, top swimmers. Those all are obviously what we want. It looks prettier that way, but it also actually has a functional benefit to the aquarium. You have different living things eating off the bottom, eating off the glass, sifting through the plants, picking stuff through the water column. And the same thing with the plants. If you have floating plants that are feeding through the water column, and you have rooted plants that are getting their nutrients mostly from the soil, you're recreating nature. And I think that is probably the biggest tip that'll set you up for success on your planted aquarium adventure. Best of luck to you. I hope you learned something today, and drop a comment down below and let me know what tips you have and what you've learned in your planted aquarium.